This is Forum. I'm Michael Krasny. A state of emergency has been declared and is still in effect in Ferguson, Missouri, after police shot and critically injured an 18-year-old on the first anniversary of the shooting of Michael Brown. A weekend of mostly peaceful demonstrations calling for more police accountability continued yesterday on the steps of St. Louis County Courthouse, and we got an update earlier on the news out of Ferguson, and we're discussing where Black Lives Matter and similar movements against police use of force stand a year after their genesis. Brandon Ellington Patterson with us in studio, a fellow with Mother Jones and recent graduate of Howard University. Eva Patterson with us by phone, president and co-founder of the Equal Justice Society and previously executive director of the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. And Kat Brooks with us by phone, founder of Anti-Police Terror Project, which held a vigil recently for Michael Brown. She's also a member of Black Lives Matter Bay Area, and we're going to bring you into this. We want to hear your thoughts, and so let's begin with our callers, and we go first. Austin, to you. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. How are you?
Okay. Thank you.
So obviously you guys are kind of talking about now the Black Lives Matter movement and where it's going, its longevity. And I wanted to talk about where the affluent, politically mobile African Americans kind of fit in. Because it seems like there's been a little bit of a lack of that. And I'm not sure that the movement as a whole can really progress into mainstream society and get its goals actively achieved on a legislative level if there's not that push, both from the core and the projection from the affluent, well-to-do in the African American society. We saw just most recently in the gay rights movement, and without that influence of money into the coalition from the kind of the top end of the gay rights activists, we wouldn't have gotten that far. So I guess my question for the Black Lives Matter movement is, how do you really embrace the entirety of what it means to be Black in America and to capture all citizens in America? Because right now it feels like it's really just pointed at kind of the younger, seemingly economically and socially disadvantaged, which is a huge portion of the Black community. But I feel like they're missing that top end a little bit.
No, it's a good question. Let me actually go to Kat Brooks on that because, in fact, Franklin Frazier, the famous Black sociologist, talked about what he called the Black bourgeoisie, by which he meant more affluent Blacks. And you don't necessarily, Kat Brooks, speak for the whole movement, obviously, but do you want to say something about bringing the more affluent in?
Sure. I mean, again, I'm glad you said that, but I want to reiterate, I do not speak for the entire movement, so this is certainly just my perspective, but I don't know that it's about us embracing affluent Black folks as much as it is about affluent Black folks embracing a movement for liberation of all Black people. So that very small percentage of Black people who are able to somehow claw, scratch, and tear their way through all of the barriers that are placed on Black people through this capitalist system that we live in to make some money, need to be willing to challenge that very system that benefited them and allow them to get to where they are, that is at the same time holding the vast majority of the brothers and sisters back. So I think in addition to that, in the conversation that Anti-Police Terror Project is having, is how we reach not just upwardly mobile Black folks in this country, but the vast majority of Black folks in this country who still aren't engaged, and who maybe aren't engaged because of the direct tactics, right, that we're engaging in. And that's not to apologize for the direct tactics that we're engaging in, but what other things can we do that are maybe more centered in building a Black self-determined agenda that they're going to feel comfortable with engaging? Because we're not just talking about police terror, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about all the ways in which war is waged on Black people in this country. And so I think we can do a better job and are in the process of doing more of finding different ways for people to plug in and get active as opposed to just engaging with police directly.
Let me thank the caller, and let me bring an online comment into this and go to you on this, if I may, Eva Patterson. This is a listener who writes, alcoholics and addicts cannot recover until they recognize and own their illness. Neither can communities like Ferguson if they refuse to recognize the source of their economic social status. The protesters should be confronting the criminal antisocial cancer that produces the petty crimes, disrespect for authority and rules that is the basis of civil society, neighborhoods, and any organization with a goal to succeed. The enemy isn't white cops, it's themselves.
Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. We call this blaming the victim. It doesn't matter if you took some cigarillos from a corner store. You shouldn't be shot by a police officer when you're trying to surrender. If you're not turning on your turn indicator when you change lanes, you shouldn't be thrown to the ground and ultimately die in prison. There are messed up Black people, there are messed up white folks, Latinos, Asian Americans, but what we're saying is that there are disproportionate numbers of black people being shot by police. Let me just give you a statistic. Black men are 6% of the population of the United States. They're 40% of those who are the unarmed people shot by police. And I want to pivot back to another point. I don't particularly feel affluent. I don't think you can be affluent and black in the Bay Area because everything's so expensive. But people like me who are lawyers have reached out to Governor Brown. Kat was at a meeting that we had with Governor Brown to try to get him to endorse independent prosecutions of police shootings. We're going to be honoring the Black Lives Matter movement at September 9th at a meeting at a gala with lots of affluent black people from the Bay Area. So we all know as black people that if you're stopped by a police officer, they don't know what is in your bank account, and you're just as likely to be pulled over for no reason as a poor black person. So I don't think that there's this false dichotomy between bougie black folks and black folks on the street, because at the end of the day, we're all black and we know what that means. But to circle back to the original question, yeah, there are black people doing not so cool things, but that isn't a reason to be shot dead if you're unarmed.
Let me bring another caller in. And Charles, that's you. Welcome. You're on the air. Good morning.
Very good morning to you, Michael, and as well as to your guest. Regarding these oath keepers that found it necessary to present themselves on the streets of Ferguson last night, I'd like to know what was the ethnic composition of that organization, and if they were not African Americans, can you imagine what the response of the police would be if there were a group of black young men, or black men, period, with bulletproof vests and long rifles, etc., on the streets, displaying a belligerent attitude?
I think it's a very important point you make, Charles, and I thank you for it. I believe they were all white, at least from what I've seen and from what I know. And they did have assault rifles. They also had bulletproof vests. I don't know how many of them there were, but they were out there. Let me go to Oakland and welcome Tracy. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Okay, thank you. Join us, please.
So, as one of your audience members, a normal KQED listener, I encountered this as a white rural with my friends. I've been arguing with my friends lately about this, about the Bernie Sanders thing, and about, you were talking about people looting, and I just feel like it's time for people to just listen instead of constantly questioning black people about their reactions.
Okay, I thank you for those thoughts. In fact, more thoughts. Here's Daniel who says, Michael, stop being obtuse. Shooting redcoats from the bushes was a violation of law. Throwing tea into the bay was a violation of the law. Also, for your guest, shame on you. Bernie can't talk about anything if you shout him from the stage. A listener tweets, running from slave masters was illegal, but we can understand the rage, injustice that might compel such acts. And Noel writes, I'm wondering about those who disrupted Senator Sanders' rallies. Since Black Lives Matter members are autonomous and can do autonomous actions, anyone can claim to be a member. I heard something about those who protested in Seattle being conservatives and were more like agent provocateurs. Can anybody clear this up for me? Thanks. Some of that was posted, Kat Brooks. Maybe you can shed some light on it? Do we know?
Yeah. So I don't know every single person that's in every Black Lives Matter chapter across the country, but I do know that it is widely held by BLM in general that engaging politicians directly around the issue of black liberation is not something that we shun, nor will we label people as agent provocateurs. Folks often want to label people as agent provocateurs, which is a very dangerous term, by the way. It's gotten people killed when they're doing things that maybe we're not comfortable with, right? And then I do just want to say quickly that we actually do know, to your caller that asked how the police and the government would have responded if it was black people that showed up with guns, so that they were going to defend themselves or their country. We know how the government would respond because that's what they did to the Black Panther Party when the Black Panther Party armed themselves and said that they would no longer tolerate being gunned down in the streets by police. We know that Chairman Fred Hampton, for example, was shot dead with his pregnant wife sleeping right next to him. So we're clear that had those been black people, blood would have been shed last night.
Brendan Ellington Patterson, let me bring you into this. What are your thoughts about the protest against Bernie Sanders, about essentially prohibiting him or interfering with him speaking.
Right. So yesterday, actually, or perhaps 2 days ago on Twitter, I kind of railed against the actions. But in having some time to reflect on it, I support what they're doing. I think black people, particularly young black people who have, as I mentioned earlier, have since been sort of radicalized since Mike Brown's killing, are fed up. And they're looking for new and interesting ways to engage and to be politically active. And I think one of the things that they are doing is, like they did at Netroots, like they did Bernie Sanders over the weekend, is storming stages and demanding of their potentially elected officials that they address black issues, that they acknowledge that they are important, and that they speak to them. I would note that Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders only presented their racial justice policies after they were confronted by Black Lives Matter leaders at the Netroots event. So I think it has produced some results.
But let me ask you also about just what we're talking about here in terms of people who feel oppressed and enraged and loot as a result, or act in other violent ways. I'm just wondering about that in light of the fact that you mentioned Michael Brown. His family asked for peaceful vigils. They did not ask for violent protest or looting. So how does one interpret that, or how does one respond to that?
His family did indeed ask for a peaceful protest, but again, as many of the other guests have mentioned, I think that I don't think it is people's place to criticize how black people react to and respond to their oppression. I think looting, I would agree, is a form of expressing the anger and the rage that people feel. People can only take so much before they explode. Martin Luther King Jr. said back during the unrest in the late 60s that rioting is the language of the unheard. And when people feel like they are not being heard when they do things like vote or engage with their politicians, they look for other ways to express that. And some of the youth have done that through looting. And I personally, I don't condone it, but I don't reject it.
Well, here's a tweet actually from a listener who says, protest is an expression of anger, disgust. Looting is an extension of the same. More looting draws attention to the same. Looting equals protest. On the other hand, here's Cindy from Oakland who says, I've heard a number of stories on NPR on Ferguson in recent days, including a lengthy one on Friday Morning Edition. Each referred to Michael Brown, the unarmed black man who was shot and killed by police. None mentioned that the DNA evidence confirmed the officer's report that Brown had tried to grab the officer's gun. This ill-informed, one-sided reporting by the media has done much to exacerbate racial tension and is being exploited by those who seek to increase rather than decrease conflict, such as your guests today. Now, Eva Patterson, this is a thorny question that this listener is raising, because Darren Wilson, the officer, was exonerated. In fact, the police somewhat talk about provocateurs. The police union had an Honor Darren Wilson Day. I don't know that they needed to do that, but they defended it by saying he was not prosecuted. He was not, in fact, found guilty of anything. And he's gone on now, television shows and the like, and said some things that are fairly provoking, I understand, of the black community. But let's put this in perspective. He was exonerated.
Well, a couple things. If you looked closely at the grand jury investigation, it seemed that McCulloch, I believe he was the DA, was leading the jurors in a way that would come out with a non-indictment. It was, I remember John Burris looking at this, and it seemed very...
You were on with John when we talked about it.
I remember this, and it seemed to me that a different district attorney, and one whose father had not been shot by a black man, might have come to a different conclusion. As for the Department of Justice, they have a very high standard of proof, which basically equates to having to prove that Darren Wilson intended to kill and to violate the civil rights of Michael Brown. That's a very difficult standard to meet. There was a very interesting piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago showing testimony from the grand jury, and it's my conclusion that Michael Brown could have been taken in for arrest without being killed, that Darren Wilson overreacted, and that's a whole nother discussion. I think it's very unfortunate that people seem to be focusing on the fact that they think there was a lot of looting in Ferguson. My understanding was that until this whole situation with the people who had nothing to do with the Michael Brown protest broke out, that the demonstrations were very, very peaceful. I follow Twitter feeds from people in Ferguson, and until that stuff went down, everything was peaceful. The last thing I want to say is to make a point about the larger racial issue here. As Kat pointed out, if black men had walked through the streets of Ferguson with armed long guns, they would have been arrested and probably shot. Look at how Dylan Roof, the little demon who shot the people in Charleston, was arrested. Was he shot? No. If you looked at the video, he was taken very peacefully. They actually took him to Burger King before they took him to jail. If he had been a black person charged with shooting white people for racial reasons, that man, I'm sure, would be dead. So I think one of the lessons that the Black Lives Matter movement is bringing to America is that racism is alive and well. No black person wants to. We're not happy because there's racism. We like to just, chill and have wonderful lives. We don't want to be out in the streets. But racism is alive and well. Black Lives Matters. They're bringing that to the fore. In 2009, only 25% of the American people thought there was a racial problem. Now, half of America thinks there's a racial problem. It's unfortunate that these poor black people being shot are the people bringing this to the national consciousness. But everybody needs to get on board, not just black folks, but everybody needs to get on board with figuring out how to eliminate racism.
Well, we have moved forward in some ways. We're seeing more video cameras, for example, on police, and, there are certainly much more consciousness and awareness. But Brendan Ellington Patterson, let me go back to you on this, because you were in Baltimore, and there are those who say Baltimore, in contrast to Ferguson, has a largely black police force. It has a black mayor. In other words, it really is, in many ways, in terms of political power, African American.
Right. So I think the issue is not particularly about white police officers targeting black people. It's about a racist culture of policing, and that racist culture can be practiced by any police officer regardless of color. So even in Baltimore, where we have a largely black police force, we have a black mayor, we can still have those cases like what happened with Freddie Gray, for example. I believe three, I'm not sure if it's three is the exact number, but several of the 5 officers that were charged with
I think three of the five
that were charged with being involved in his death were black.
Yeah.
So we can see that even when there are black officers, they can still be involved in the racial profiling and the targeting of black people.
And we're going to bring in more of our callers. Keith, thanks for waiting. You're on Forum. Join us.
Michael, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. First, I want to say that in Sonoma County, as well as everywhere, we have many, many fine police officers doing a difficult job. In light of that, I just kind of wanted to bring you up to speed if you're interested about what's going on in Sonoma County since the shooting of Andy Lopez about a year before Ferguson erupted. And first, I'd like to say that because it happened within a Latino community, while there are lots of immigration issues, I believe that that's part of the reason it wasn't much more of an uproar as it was. In the meantime, certainly the county has made strides, but the civil rights investigation was only focused on that one shooting where the officer shot young Andy Lopez as he was turning around with a pellet gun and shot him 7 times from behind. I'm not saying all of those landed in his...
I think we lost that connection for some reason, but it brings up another question here, Kat Brooks, and that comes to an online comment from one of our listeners named Ben, who says, what does your panelists from think about All Lives Matters, or would the movement be better labeled Brown Lives Matters to include Latinos and other minority groups? Since you mentioned Andy Lopez, some thoughts from you?
Sure. I mean, the system of white supremacy and how that manifests in policing absolutely impacts other folks besides black people, right? Our brown brothers and sisters, our native brothers and sisters, Southeast Asian brothers and sisters. That said, black folks represent the largest group of people that are being gunned down by, again, police officers, security guards, and vigilantes. And I think it says something about our country and where we are in terms of black folks and how everybody looks at black folks through the lens of white supremacy, that they are threatened, that folks are threatened by black people taking space for black people to talk about what is happening in our community. And we're not ashamed of that. We're unapologetic about that. Of course we know that all lives matter, but what we're saying is we're going to take this moment in time right now to focus on the black ones, because the schools, the police, the courts, the prison system, they haven't figured that out yet.
We've had some recent killings of police officers by people of color, though, specifically in a couple of cases by black men, and you say what to that? Do the police lives matter?
I say that it is tragic when any life is taken in a violent manner. That said, being a police officer and being murdered actually is not some big epidemic that's happening across this country. You are more likely to be killed if you're a garbage collector than you are a police officer. And what we find is that rather than focusing on the tragedy of a police officer's life being stolen or taken, what we find is that has been used to beat back the Black Lives Matter movement or somehow make the things that we're saying what is happening to our fathers and children and mothers irrelevant. One does not make the other go away.
We go to more of your calls. Let's welcome Philip. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. Great show. I'm a white guy with blue eyes, and I'm always concerned about police officers, too. And, I agree with what your guests are saying. I just want to distinguish, though, about people that are abused by officers when they're non-violent and people that are abused by officers when they are violent. For example, Rodney King was fleeing and beat up on his officers. But there are all these, innocent people of color and blacks that are beat up and shot that aren't doing that. And what I'm really getting at is, what about black on black crime? If Black Lives Matter, many more blacks die. There's a lot of violence in the black community. How about extending the program not just to police violence against blacks, but the whole culture of violence?
I don't think anybody here would object to fighting violence in a wide-scale level. Anybody want to speak up in response to the caller?
I do, and then I'll go ahead, Eva. Go ahead, real quick, and then I'll back up. So I think that's the other thing, is that people assume from a very outside perspective that those of us that are in the trenches fighting police terror are also fighting to have more peaceful communities where we can raise our children. We are parents, we are our husbands, we are wives. Of course we don't want violence in our communities. We mourn every black life lost. We also are very clear that white supremacy, the system, is not about a people, it's a system of policies and practices that give white people privilege and power, is responsible for both tracks. They're responsible for the state terror and responsible for the intercommunal violence because it's that system of white supremacy that creates the conditions in our communities, no jobs, lack of education, trash ass communities that corporate companies are dumping in, the drugs. I don't know any black people that make guns, that make guns and manufacture guns. That's what's being flooded in our communities by a system that is bent on upholding the power and privilege of one group while oppressing the rights and civil liberties of another group.
Very good
Brooks,
point.
You want to add something here?
Oh, that was Kathy.
I'm sorry, Eva Patterson, you want to add something here?
What's interesting is, and I don't want to get all angry at the last caller because I think we're all in this together, but it's so interesting to me how it keeps getting focused away from the fact that so many black folks are being shot down and killed. 708 people have been shot and killed by police since the beginning of the year. 115 of them were shot in California. When we gave those statistics to Governor Brown a couple of months ago, he was just shocked. And so I think it's important for us to keep focused on that. Also, there are lots of marches that go on in the black communities of Oakland and all around the country, organized by people whose kids have been the victims of crime, trying to keep the peace and trying to have less violence in our communities. That doesn't get a lot of play in the media, but that goes on all the time. Kat's exactly correct. We're not a monolithic movement. We're saying that a number of things need to be changed, but right now we want to focus on the police shootings of unarmed black people because, as people have pointed out, that happens about once every 28 hours in this country, and that's terrifying.
And here's an online comment I wanted to read from a listener named Catherine, who says, as a white person, I'm deeply grateful to the Black Lives Matter movement, leaders and activists who are investing so much time, risking their lives, paying court fines, being put in jail to ensure that the entire country knows and understands the violence and the legacies of white supremacy that black communities have known for generations. What will it take for the focus of our conversations to be on how we can systematically make white supremacy illegal in all its forms and to change the cultural fabric of this nation to end racism? Very thoughtful remarks, and let me get another caller on. Dilip, join us. Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. My name is Dilip, and I have Michael, I like your program a lot, and a lot of respect for you. But just a piece of advice, if you will. Your comments about, I heard two exchanges about the rights and why people riot because of their own express race. And you try to, put in your own feelings of thought into it. And maybe it's better to hear what the subject matter experts or they have to say. So that was just a comment from my side. And I have a question for the panel. Am I on air?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a question for the panel. That when they throw out statistics like 6% and 40%, and there is some racist, and I don't deny that, but a lot has to do with poverty, which leads to less education and poor choices. And there's a key percent of poverty and less education that makes those numbers. So when they talk about that, they should talk about this also, because if they just talk about racism, then it makes that more angry in their expression.
Well,
So
let me ask Brandon.
And now I'm going to stop just to put my 5 minutes in on this particular take. Ferguson, the legacy, the struggle, the obvious. I mean, just the obvious. I mean, most of the stuff is just obvious, and it's never going to stop. I mean, the whole thing was when the people came down, the militia came down from wherever they came from to engage, along with already present police officers who are already in a position to take care of business and do whatever they had to do. Where does militia come from? And it just goes to show you that we're gonna have a problem. Is it a gun problem? I don't know, but there is a problem. The bigger problem for me is, as one person mentioned, was that why should, and I've said this before in another one of my videos, why should a white police officer care about a black life when we just killing each other all the time? And then to expound on that, where are the parents? I mean, where are the parents of these children that are out in this situation? You guys know, I mean, I'm an older guy, so when we grew up, our mothers were strict. We couldn't go past a block. We couldn't do anything without having to check in. It was just the way it was then, and it should be the way it is now. Too many parents having children out of wedlock, not monitoring the children, too busy trying to be friends, too busy trying to let them do what they want to do in order to keep a friendship, and nobody's monitoring these kids. And they allow them to go out and do what they want, and they let them go out here and spend $300 on belts and buying them $200 shoes and all this stuff instead of trying to save money and teaching them a culture of being self-dependent, not on the government, not on what you're taking out of my check every week that I'm working so hard for. It's unbelievable. So let me break this down to you, and I'm gonna take it out of here. Where does Straight Outta Compton come in right now? Where does a group of dudes who just changed the game when it came to rap, and I understand that. Remember, it was all about fuck the police and all that stuff. So this is nothing but another antagonistical situation is being presented at this particular time. Ice Cube and them should be ashamed of themselves, because this doesn't bring anything to the table that's going to help any black folk. People don't care about music nowadays. White folks control the industry. Jews control the industry. So when they're letting music being played over the radio, hypnotize, memorize black young folks, and they're having sex, I mean, and all kinds of stuff, kill each other, whatever, fuck this, fuck that, twerk, bitch, bend over, all this stuff, let me fuck you, all this stuff that is just being said right out right now. I can hear it on Foxhole all day. You don't hear it on regular radio, but I listen to Foxhole. This is unbelievable. The parents are not responsible until something happened to a child, and then they want to come out the woodworks. Other than that, they out in the street partying. Most of them out at the clubs partying. They out there partying, don't even know where their own kids are. Until the kids get hurt, then they cry, oh, my baby, my baby. Come on, man, stop it. If black people ain't taking care of other black people, then why should white cops who are here, they're here for a reason. You gonna tell me all the police officers were screened? They were asked a question like I was asked when I came to work for my job, do you enjoy working with the public? Yes, I do. Do you think those police officers asked, are you a Ku Klux Klan member? Are you a militia member? Are you a skinhead? Did they ask them that? Did they ask them, do you have anything against black people? Did they ask them, were they racist? Did they ask them anything? Did they ask them anything? To check them. Psychological checks. We get psychological checks here just to drive a bus. I had to take a psychological test when I was trying to work for Philadelphia Electric. Long time ago, I had to take a psychological test with the trick questions backwards, forward, sideways. Are they doing this with these police officers? Hell no. They're coming here to kill black people. They're racist anyway. They're coming from the hills. The same militia guys who came down last night, that's where they probably came from. Look, this is what it is. Sharpton don't care. He's paid off. Jesse's paid off. He ain't saying nothing. Sports figures can't say nothing. They getting billions of dollars. They can't say nothing. Ain't nobody stepping up. You on your own, dog. This is going to conclude this 30-minute scenario. You check it out. You let me know what you think. I'm out. Peace.